Hello clever people and welcome to my video on the worst 10 films of 2019. So unlike my best films of 2019 list, I usually shoot this one a little closer to when the year ended because for the best films of the year, I usually like to try to see everything before I make the list because to me, I don't see the point in making a list if there are 10 to 12 other movies that could easily be on there that I haven't seen that I need to go check out. So while I am still going through a list of movies trying to see as many as I can before I make my best of 2019 list, I am going to make my worst of 2019 list because a lot of terribly reviewed movies I'm not going to intentionally go and check out. The good ones I want to see because they're so well reviewed. And I do have a certain temptation in me to see the bad ones, but there are just certain ones that I didn't want to see, and those include The Haunting of Sharon Tate and The Fanatic. Those two I heard were god-awful, and I decided not to see them because I just did not want to. So my bottom 10 list of the year is going to be films that I saw in theaters once and never want to see ever again. Before we start off with the list, I will mention some dishonorable mentions. Velvet Buzzsaw was a movie that had a lot of talented people behind it, but ended up being an absolute nightmare and an absolute disaster. Aladdin was a movie I thought from the beginning looked terrible, and it turned out to be so completely horrible. The Kitchen came out in August, and it feels like this movie came out in January because I can barely remember a single thing about it. This is easily some of the worst editing of the year. Jexi was a completely unfunny, completely painful to watch movie with Adam Devine. Everything about this movie felt like it was super cheaply made. It honestly felt like a movie that should have been shown on Comedy Central and not in theaters. Black Christmas was a movie that I saw at the end of the year. I was expecting it to be bad, but not quite as bad as it turned out being. This movie was pushing its message so hard that it absolutely fell flat on its face. And Countdown, a movie that honestly I hope that I never have to see again in my life. So those are my dishonorable mentions, and now we will get into the list. At number 10, we have Abominable. This got good reviews. Shocking to me. It's shocking to me that this somehow got good reviews because I thought this was the worst animated movie of the year, or the second worst animated movie of the year. The animation to me looked absolutely terrible. It was such a cliche way of telling a story. I saw it with a bunch of friends. We were making fun of it the entire time. There's nothing about this that would appeal to children, nothing that would appeal to adults. Honestly, I don't see the point of this movie existing. At number 9, we have The Curse of La Llorona. This was a Conjuring movie that I had no clue was a Conjuring movie until I went into it and afterwards. And it's a really sad thing that this movie has to be tied to that universe because I have not seen a horror movie be this painfully dull in so long. There was absolutely nothing about this movie that stuck out to me. None of the scares were there. None of the acting was there. Overall, this movie just felt like an absolute mess to me, and it's really sad to me that the Conjuring universe started at a place that was so high up that a lot of people loved, and it's slowly declined now to become this, The Curse of La Llorona. At number 8, we have Gemini Man. Will Smith was trying really hard here. He was playing two different versions of himself, but overall, I think Ang Lee spent all of his time trying to develop this new technology and zero time on anything that a director should spend time on. This was extremely boring. The dialogue is so horrible. I mean, there are certain lines from this movie that I still quote with my friends, such as, "It's not gun time, it's coffee time." I mean, that's a real line in this movie. All the characters feel like they're out of a really bad TV show, and this movie overall is just shot really terribly. So Gemini Man was a movie that definitely deserves to be on this list. At number 7, we have Polar. This was a Netflix original that came out all the way back in January. And all I can really say about this movie is that it feels like if John Wick was made by a guy who has no clue how to make movies. And the thing is, there's some movies on this list that are just on here because they're super boring. Gemini Man, The Curse of La Llorona. However, this one was like extremely bad, and it was passionate about how bad it was. It did not care if you didn't like this movie. It was going full balls to the walls insane on absolutely everything, and it just ended up feeling like sensory overload watching it. At number 6, we have 47 Meters Uncaged. What a stupid movie. I mean, 47 Meters Down was pretty bad, and I honestly didn't think that you could get any worse from there, and yet this movie somehow managed to get on that level. It's so little in plot, and even though I went in expecting a bad movie, it was even worse than I expected it to be. I was laughing at everything, and when I wasn't laughing, I was bored out of my mind waiting for the movie to be over. This is the longest hour and a half I've had all year long. It's such a short movie, and so little happens in that time, but it feels like they feel an incessant need to just kill off as many characters as possible. When you think that the movie is over, there's like another 10 or 15 minutes, or as soon as you think they're about to get out of there, they don't. It's really, really annoying, and I wish that I just didn't see this movie at all. At number 5, we have Godzilla King of the Monsters. This was a huge letdown to me because I'm actually a fan of the first Godzilla in 2014. I think that that movie is entertaining, and even though it's not super well made, it's still something that I wouldn't mind watching again. And I was hoping Godzilla King of the Monsters would continue this, and unfortunately it didn't. This killed all my excitement for Godzilla vs. King Kong. This was super long, and I saw it towards the end of the school year. I was just looking for dumb fun, honestly. My brain was completely turned off while watching it, and yet somehow this movie still managed to bore the hell out of me. Nothing about the characters is interesting. Nothing about the monsters or attacking is interesting. The action, it's like the reverse problem of Godzilla, or at least it's the reverse problem to a certain extent. In the first Godzilla, the final action scene is just the monsters. There's no human beings on the screen for at least 10 to 15 minutes of that final action scene. And then some of the other ones, it felt like they were following the humans too much. Godzilla King of the Monsters, you're with the humans the entire time. These characters you don't care about, and you're not able to see any of the action. So when there's no action and there's no good storyline, you just have a 2.5 hour bore. At number 4, we have Cats. There's so much that has been said about this absolutely god-awful movie. I can just agree with everything. The CGI looks terrible. The songs are absolutely horrible, and they're horribly performed. The performances are so weird and screwball. The way that this movie is edited is extremely confusing. The conflict in this movie is left for the last 5 minutes of the movie, and I was explaining the plot to somebody today. It can literally be summed up in 2 or 3 words. It's such a, or 2 or 3 sentences. It's such a simple movie. Nobody needs to see this. I'm honestly shocked that it came out and that it had so much talent and budget behind it, because it ended up being an absolute disaster. At number 3, we have the third movie on this list, or in an honorable mention, that came out on October 11th. October 11th had Jexi, which was a dishonorable mention, Gemini Man, which was my number 8, and it had my number 3, The Addams Family. There was some weird critical acclaim for this movie. Not necessarily acclaim, but people said, wow, this could have been a lot worse, and it didn't turn out that bad. I can't agree with a single sentiment that those people gave this movie. I am baffled at how awful the animation looks. Still, it looks like animation from the early Sims game, and it looks even worse than that. The character proportions are all over the place, and the animation is so bad that the whole movie feels like an assault on the eyes, and nothing else works in the movie at all. It felt like I was watching something that was intended for tiny infant children who had no clue what else to watch. It was terrible. Alright, my number 2 and number 1 are really, really close for me on where they land. They both came out on the same weekend as well, not October 11th, but January 11th. It had a good movie in the upside that was solid, that was enjoyable, but it had my 2 worst movies of the year. These ones are super duper close, but one of them just slightly out edges the other. So my number 2 worst movie of the year is A Dog's Way Home. I'm baffled at just how much of a disaster this movie is. I saw it all the way back in January, and I thought there's no way that this movie will stay as the worst number 1 throughout the year. At least I had a feeling that hopefully it wouldn't be, or maybe hopefully it would, so that the rest of the year would turn out pretty good. And you know, this movie doesn't have as many bad movies as last year did. I think last year I did my worst 20 movies of 2018, and I'm only doing 10 this year because there wasn't that many bad movies. And A Dog's Way Home ended up staying towards the bottom of the list for so long. I have no clue who this movie is made for. Absolutely no clue. Because it seems like it's supposed to be a kid's movie, right? But there's a scene in the movie where a homeless man kidnaps a dog, chains it to himself, and dies. And the dog is left stranded and starving, and then is picked up by a gay couple and helps the gay couple find their dog, and then runs away. It's so confusing. That doesn't sound like the plot of a kid's movie. It doesn't sound like the plot of any movie. This was a hodgepodge of so many different storylines going in every single which way, each storyline getting like 2 or 3 minutes dedicated to it, with the huge string underlying it all being the dog, and in the end it did not matter at all. I was so offended while watching this movie, especially because people in my theater seemed to be engaged while watching it, and I know that that's not general. Generally, audiences hated it and critics hated it, but I was just in shock that people were into this movie in my theater. I can't understand why a single human being would like anything about this movie, and because of that, it's my number 2 worst movie of the year. Now, there was another movie that came out the same weekend, and it was just a tiny bit worse, and I think that this is definitely in my bottom 10 movies of all time. And that movie, my number 1 worst movie of 2019, is Replicas. It was the same thing with The Dog's Way Home. I saw it early in the year, and I thought, it would be a good thing if nothing replaced it this year, if nothing replaced this as my number 1 worst movie. And nothing did. This was bad on so many different levels. Keanu Reeves is beloved by so many people, and it honestly makes me happy that he is, and I'm really, really happy that this movie made no money, because that means nobody has to have a tarnished view of Keanu Reeves. No one has to think of Keanu Reeves and somehow their brain subtly has Replicas pop up in their mind. This was a disaster on so many levels, and I've said that about so many different movies on this list, but this one, there's a reason that it's in my bottom 10 movies of all time, possibly even bottom 5, because it just doesn't feel like a movie at all. The way that this movie is written is just painstaking. It feels like the type of writing quality you get out of Lifetime. The acting, even especially from Keanu Reeves, is so terrible. I mean, his family dies in this movie, and yet he looks stoic, and he looks like he's trying so hard to have some emotion come out of it, and it doesn't work. The studio gave everything away in the trailers, and I mean literally everything about this movie, and there's CGI in it that's even worse than the CGI animation in The Addams Family. It was baffling to me. It looked completely unfinished, and it looked like something unfinished from like 25 years ago, like from the first Toy Story movie, something that would be unfinished there. That's how terrible it was. Nobody involved in this movie seemed to give a care about how it was going to turn out, so in the end, Replicas was the worst movie of 2019. Alright, that concludes my list. So, what were your least favorite movies of 2019? Comment in the comment section below and let me know. I'm Robert Burke, and this has been The Clever Critics. Goodbye.